We are going to be discussing the Internet Security realm, aka cybersecurity. My name is Joe DeLuca. I am the Director of Management Information Systems at Costerisan, and we'll be talking about some of the different tactics, techniques, issues that are revolving around the Internet realm, and some of the things that we can do, best practices, recommendations, help mitigate some of those exploits and risks. So as we talk about, this realm in general, there are certain acronyms that get thrown out here and there: IoT, IOE, BYOD, DOS, and they get thrown around haphazardly. So I wanted to take just a quick second to go over what these things are, what they mean to us as organizations, and how we may or may not be seeing them. IoT is probably one of the bigger, more common acronyms that's thrown out there. It stands for the Internet of Things. Compared to the IOE, which is the Internet of Everything, the IoT, those are the things that are tangible, the things that you can touch, feel, wear. When we look at security cameras, we'll talk about those in a little bit. When we talk about your iWatches, Fitbits, anything that you can, again, touch or feel, those are typically designated as the IoT, the Internet of Things. BYOD, bring your own device. This is one of the trending things that happen in large corporations, where we've gotten away from companies providing phones to our employees, to our engaged staff, and instead allowing them to bring in their own devices, whether that be a tablet, smartphone, or any of the above, to check email for VPN access in. Those devices can pose a bit of a threat because, we're not always sure what kind of security is on there. And if that goes unchecked, then that's another risk point, another issue that we would need to make sure we're mitigating. So, those IoT devices will never have adequate security. You will always have an issue where you have the tech-savvy users that, let's say, are setting up video surveillance cams. I'll give you an example of this in just a second, but then you have the non-tech savvy users that just take it out of the box, put it on, and away you go. You sync it up to your phone. That issue, that scenario where you are not protecting those devices adequately, can lead to takeover. We are finding more and more that the authors of these applications are able to dig in, whether it's through a Bluetooth exploit or a wireless exploit, or again, any of the known risk issues that are out there, to then go through that device and then take over your appliance. In addition, we are finding that these devices then can be turned into botnets. A botnet is a network, a classification of machines or devices that can send out spam, can send out more of this malware to workstations within an organization. They can create what they call a distributed denial of service, where they're constantly barraging the network so that we have no access, or at least degraded access within the four walls. Of course, there's the insider threat that we'll talk about. Again, one of the examples that I just recently came across. I was at a local bar here and noticed that they had security cameras in each of the four corners. Most of these security cams have standard IP addresses, portals that you gain access to, and there are certainly lots of websites that talk about, what these default usernames and passwords are. Very similar to the hacks that we've seen with baby cams, with refrigerators, the smart fridges from Samsung. Again, going unchecked, these things are open entry points. So I was able to get into the video surveillance system using a default username, default password. In this case, it was just admin and then password as the credentials, which anybody that was using that unethically would be able to cause some damage there, or at least create some issue for the organization itself. So we're finding that, if you don't have the necessary protections on these devices that are coming into your organizations, they do end up being a threat. Just a quick fact, 55% of the incidents from internal actors, being your internal end users, was due to privilege abuse. This can be, again, anything from the BYOD to accounts that have elevated permissions. I see a lot of end users that have the permission of domain admin, for ease of access, gotten the statement that, well, we're a small company and everybody just has access to everything. That certainly is a risk point that should be mitigated. Globally, 89% of all respondents, according to this Warmetric survey, felt that their organization was now more at risk from an insider attack than anything external. We'll talk about how in any network, your end user is always going to be the weakest link. So we always want to make sure that we're taking the necessary precautions as IT professionals to take care of that, to combat that, and make sure that we can reduce that risk whenever possible. When we talk about insider threat, it could be a compromised system. An end user clicking on a link that they maybe shouldn't be clicking on, visiting a website that maybe they shouldn't be visiting. Could be a careless item. Again, there's a social media email, a LinkedIn email that has been spoofed, and we click on that, and now we're getting some of that malware coming through. And of course, we never like to hear about it or see about it, but we always have to look at the nefarious. An end user that might be disgruntled and looking to cause some destruction upon their exit, or thinking that it might come back to him or her. So, certainly this is a multifaceted issue that we have to take a look at. Knowing that the personal attack surface that we have to combat is growing. Social media, cyber attackers love social media. They know as well as we do that, our users spend a lot of time. Again, it could be something like LinkedIn, where we're working with other businesses, the B2B industry. Could be where we're, on our lunch break, we're connecting to Facebook and, talking to our family, friends, relatives. They know that we spend a lot of our time on that, and because of that, we are extremely exposed and extremely vulnerable to those types of attacks. And it's certainly gone way beyond the spoofing emails. We're seeing like jacking, where these criminals will modify the Facebook or other social media like button so that it will download malware as opposed to liking the content. We're seeing link jacking, where there is a website link in an email or on a site that is read to make you believe that it's taking you to a certain location, when in actuality it's taking you somewhere completely different, somewhere typically where malware has manifested, and it is a great way for you to pick that up on your workstations. Social spam and phishing. Any kind of social engineering is certainly trending. We're seeing a large number of spear phishing campaigns that are out there nowadays, where these hackers, these criminals, are essentially harvesting emails that are widely available on the internet, on our corporate facing, our front-end facing websites, other articles that might be quickly searched by Google, and using those to then harvest and send out this type of, again, malicious activity. So again, we're extremely exposed and vulnerable when it comes to social media, because we all do it. Engaged employees are a two-way sword, of course, that we try to have this mix of work and personal life. On our devices, the BYOD devices, we are certainly using it for our corporate email, but we may have other apps and other things that are running on that could be hacked, could be an exposure point. Just the other day, I was reading that Pokemon Go, the wildly fast-growing app that everyone seems to be playing, they've already come up with an exploit for that allows you to, upon downloading this app, opening up access to your device or your workstation. Again, these criminals play on the naive. They play on our wants, our likes. So we definitely have to keep an eye on those and work to mitigate that. Most infections in our corporations happen during office hours. Again, as we're looking at email, visiting websites, 20% of those infected machines are attributed to enterprise networks, or can be attributed to enterprise networks. end stations are increasingly becoming vulnerable for a number of reasons. 99% of all computers within operation are vulnerable to one exploit kit or another. The majority of our workstations are running a combination of, Adobe Reader or Java or Adobe Flash. Those three, Shockwave, those exploit kits and pieces of software run on pretty much every workstation, and they tend to be the most wildly exploited for that sheer fact that they're ever present. So making sure that these workstations get patched as Adobe issues these patches that we are then turning around and patching our workstations is a great way to help stop or at least prevent some of these things from coming through. Of course, ransomware is on the rise. No sign of it backing down. The adverse is actually happening where the crypto wall authors, the ransomware authors, are becoming more focused, more targeted, to the point where they are able to now determine whether or not we have multifunction devices and use that as an entry point. A colleague of mine and I were discussing, we recently visited a site that had become encrypted with a ransomware variant, and looking at the accounts that were compromised, the one that was showing up predominantly was the Xerox account. So just like we need to protect our cameras and our other wearable devices, our IoT devices, we also need to make sure that the rest of our network is being protected as well and locked down, including the multifunction devices. So something to keep an eye out there. Of course, with ransomware, once data is encrypted, you really don't have many options. The three that stand out, you reformat, start over, you are able to restore from backup, or of course you pay the ransom, which we never recommend. Authorities, though, set the right atmosphere for these cyber criminals. There was a Boston agent that's in charge of the FBI Cyber and Counterintelligence Program that was heard making the comment, to be honest, we often advise people just to pay the ransom. So even from the FBI's cyber intelligence program, we're getting the wrong information. Victims are getting the wrong information because there is no guarantee that you're going to get that decryption key, that you're not going to open yourself up for a secondary or tertiary attack. So we want to make sure that we have policies, procedures intact and tested, verified, to make sure that if unfortunately we were to acquire something like this, that we have a way out. We have a way to get back to our daily routine and operation and continue on. As I mentioned earlier, in cybersecurity, people are always considered the weakest link. They are the most abundant resource and, of course, the most susceptible target. Something that we stress. We can't stress enough end-user training. Email security is another thing that, of course, comes into play. The majority of this ransomware, malware comes via email. 91% of successful data breaches started with a spear phishing campaign or attack. And again, as I discussed earlier, all of these email addresses are widely available. All it takes is a couple of quick, readily available tools to scour the internet, scour your websites, find out where these email addresses are. Typically, we're going to be able to know whether it's a CEO, CFO, executive director, so we can further target these attacks. And then using these publicly available addresses, we start these campaigns. So, you have to get into the mindset of how these bad guys work to know how they might hit you next. But again, end user accounts are going to be always the most targeted in any scenario. So when we talk about these different types of risks, we need to talk about what are some of the best practices. Essentially, that's, the meat of this is you're never going to be able to protect everybody from everything, but we want to make sure that we're doing the best that we can to minimize any damage, minimize that surface area that these attackers use to get access to us. The most important thing, obviously, is backup, backup, backup. Cannot stress that enough. Multiple levels of backup are always preferred. Whether you have an old legacy system like a tape or a cartridge or something cloud-based, you need to have multiple levels. The authors of these nefarious applications know that we have various versions of software or data and documents that they're going to turn that feature off so that we can't go back to that. So we always suggest that you have multiple layers of backup and at least one disconnected backup, whether that is a cartridge that you pull out of your daily cycle, or that's something where you have an external portable hard drive that you run separately. Having that disconnected backup will further the scenario of being able to restore. Quite commonly, malware is programmed to look for those attached devices, whether it be a SAN or a NAS or an attached portable drive, to erase that data or at bare minimum encrypt that data as well. We also suggest that keep those backups for at least 6 months. Sounds like a lot, and depending on how much room you have on your devices will determine how much you can actually keep. As a general rule of thumb, 6 months gives you the ability to go back in time if needed to get you back up and running. One of the items that sometimes gets left out of the backup cycle is your websites. If you host your own website internally on an IIS server, make sure that you're backing those up as well. Very easy to do. It's built into the software, but again, one of those things that sometimes gets forgotten. Volume shadow copies. Again, I mentioned that malware does, especially some of the real bad ransomware, will take a look at the volume shadow service and copies that you have. It still doesn't hurt to have those active and configured. While you may not get hit with a really bad ransomware strain, you may just have a malware infection in general. Being able to quickly recover from the volume shadow copies is a great idea. And then lastly, with regard to the backup, make sure that we're also scheduling and performing routine data restoration and verification tests. I can't tell you the number of corporations that I've gotten into where the IT professional has said, yes, backups are running, it's working, we're visually seeing backup tapes ejecting, but when it comes time to do a verification test, tapes are empty, data is corrupt, cartridges are old. So scheduling that routine maintenance on the tape data goes a long way to make sure that in the event of a disaster, you're able to quickly recover and restore your data. If you are using cloud file storage, whether that's a Dropbox or a OneDrive, you have to understand that that's not a backup. That is just as susceptible as your on-prem data that you have sitting on a server or workstation. So always consider versioning there for all of your important non-confidential files, anything that's not mission critical. Of course, any mission critical should be part of that multi-tiered backup system, so you certainly have a lot of redundancy there. Implementing a web filtering appliance. A lot of the bad stuff that's out there, again, praising the naive and the behaviors of the end users. So implementing a web filter appliance helps to combat that, to prevent us from going to sites that we shouldn't be going to or clicking on links that we probably shouldn't be clicking. Of course, that goes hand in hand with an antivirus solution that's constantly updated, that is also performing that active and behavioral scanning. Some of the other items that I've seen in my travels are with regards to the firewall. It's not uncommon for me to get yep, I have a firewall, we're good, and I use the term quite often, the set it and forget it. Firewalling, though, is one of those devices that you have to keep a constant eye on. Many of the new firewalls that you can purchase nowadays are they have the geo-block capability, so we can block locations or IP addresses by location. So if we're not doing any business with China or Russia, we can block those IP sets so they don't even get into the front edge of our network. So ensuring that our firewalls are capable, or at least that we're reviewing them and auditing them to determine whether or not a risk exploit exists, goes a long way to keep all of those attackers at bay. Implement and enable ad blocking capacities and anti-spam filters. The ad blocking, Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge, Chrome, they all have a built-in pop-up blocker. We can further that with some add-ons that NoScript is a good one for Chrome that prevents some of that. If you click on a link that has some bad script behind it, it will block it from running. So bundling our browsers with some additional support goes a long way. Spam filters, there's certainly a lot of them out there. There are cloud-based services and on-premise based services. We certainly suggest finding one that works with your organization. We can certainly help you out with that. Internally at our firm, we use a Barracuda spam and virus filter that gets updated, and that's really the important thing with any of these filters, guys, is making sure that it is staying updated to catch all of these new fingerprints. Literally, these ransomware variants are coming out daily, multiple times a day, in fact, and we need a good way to make sure that our end users are as shielded, as protected as possible. Knowing that, though, no spam filter, no antivirus software, no anti-malware application is going to be 100% foolproof. We need to ensure that our end users are educated, that we're training them to help identify these social engineering and spear phishing type campaigns, that they know what is acceptable use within your organization, what sites they should be going to and what sites are completely off limits, whether that be something like a social media. You are not allowed to be on Facebook, when you're using our equipment, but that should always be have the back-end structure of an acceptable use policy that we can reaffirm that fact. But training those end users goes a long way, and it's not this is certainly not a set it and forget it type environment. We need to continue our end user training, whether that be through our own internal spear phishing campaigns, or using dummy flash drives, leaving them out on the floor to see who picks them up and uses them. There are many ways that we can be socially engineered to do things, and we want to be able to identify which users require more training than others. But as a whole, globally, all users should be trained throughout the year to ensure that we're keeping up with the attacks that are out there. Group policy is a feature that is enabled in all of our servers, and it can be configured to restrict applications from running in some of the directories that tend to be exploited the most, predominantly the app data folder. The program data folder would be another one, temp folders would be a third. These directories tend to be a breeding ground for any kind of malware, virus, ransomware. These are typically the depot where they all sit before the trigger enables them to run. So being able to use some of the software that we already have at our disposal to restrict or prevent those from running goes a long way to protecting not only our client workstations but our server shares as well. When we talk about server shares, the commonality that I see is that we have everyone or domain users with read-write capabilities to all shares, whether that be just a company shared folder, in some cases, in some of the worst cases, even into the accounting structure if you're running an ERP solution or have another piece of software that's running that has mission critical or sensitive data in it. So we want to make sure that we are only giving write permissions to the shares for those users and groups that absolutely require them. If in the realm of Dynamics GP, we have the Dynamics GP folder that has things like our reports dictionaries and our OLI notes and things of that nature that are very sensitive and required for the application to run. We should lock that share down so that only the necessary people have it. If a client workstation were to get infected with some kind of a variant, we know at least that we're providing some protection for that structure. Of course, if an accountant or somebody that does have access to that folder becomes infected, we're still in the same boat, but at least we're shielding from the users that don't require access to. Autoplay is one of those things where we pop in our thumb drive and the system opens up and says, what do you want to do with this? Lots of malware will manifest itself through autoplay, so we want to make sure that we're disabling that through group policy as well. In addition, Office macros. There have been a couple of strains recently that stem off the Locky strain of ransomware that will come through an Office macro. So we want to make sure that if we're not using or we don't need those types of that type of functionality within our Office products, let's make sure we're disabling that so that they can't run. Of course, we need to keep our operating systems, whether it's a Windows or a Mac machine or Linux, we need to keep them up to date. Not only the operating systems where those come through the standard Windows updates, at least on the Windows side, we want to make sure that we're updating our third-party applications as well, especially those that have known exploit kits. Again, the Adobe Readers, the Flashes, the Javas of the world. Certainly we need to make sure that those stay updated, and the side of that is when we're buying our machines from Dell or from CDW or whoever our vendor is, or even off the shelf at a Best Buy, if there is no need for the Flash and the Java, let's make sure we're uninstalling it, get it off there so that exploit is mitigated right from the get-go. When we do get infected with ransomware, we want to make sure that, again, we're not leaving it to chance. We want to make sure that we're protecting our walls, our corporations, our servers. We should never be in a situation where we're having to pay a ransom. I always use the phrase, we don't negotiate with terrorists. Ransomware is one of those things where it will continue to grow the more we fund them, the more victims fund the cause. They come up with bigger and better. So we want to make sure that we have those backups especially in place, but we also are locking down our organization so that these things can't come through. So some general thoughts and on cybercrime, cyber criminals in general. That space is not going anywhere. It's going to continue to grow. We have seen that over the first quarter of 2016, there has been more money spent, shelled out to pay ransom than all of 2015 combined. So, there is no sign of it slowing down. If anything, again, they are going to continue to revamp, retarget, refocus their attempts to target the bigger corporations, the ones that are going to be more capable and prone to spending the money when they do find themselves infected, whether that be through, again, some multifunction devices that you have, a Xerox, a Linear, a Ricoh, a Canon, whether it's video surveillance products or through one of these BYOD devices that your end users are wearing. It's certainly not going away. We need to continue to invest in securing our organizations, making sure that, and investing is not only in hardware and software, it's also, again, in user training to make sure that from all facets we are leveraging our technology, our security, and keeping those attacks at bay. Attackers are after data, bottom line. If they're not after your data and holding it ransom, the bottom line is that they're looking for money. So that's where us as organizations, as enterprises, need to invest our efforts of protection into securing our data. Once inside the organization, attackers don't attack, but they abuse. They, again, will abuse the lack of security. They will abuse the lack of control that we have on our networks to further the damage, to expand upon the ransom. The more data that they're able to encapsulate and encrypt, the more Bitcoin, the more ransom they can pull from the victims. So we need to, again, minimize that surface area so that this doesn't happen. So having said that, we need to look for solutions that will detect abuse more so than attack. any of the corporate level, enterprise level firewalls and routers typically have the option for what they call IDS and IPS. That is the intrusion detection and intrusion prevention. Understanding that the firewall is merely a gatekeeper based on a port. If your organization browses the web, port 80 would be open. So the firewall just says, you're trying to come in or go out of port 80, yes, this port is open, come on through. That isn't good enough. We need to make sure that we're sniffing that traffic that's coming through port 80 to ensure that it is legitimate, that it's not carrying any script, it's not laden with any malware, and that's where the intrusion detection and prevention really comes into play. So if you have a router or firewall that is not running that, or even if it is, I've seen a lot of cases where IDS, IPS is enabled, but there is no monitoring. So again, any of these services are only as good as the people that are monitoring them. So whether it be on a routine basis, you're getting into those logs to determine, anything that may have happened over the course of the last 7 days, or preferably automating that monitoring so that if something is sensed, you are receiving a note via email that says, something to that effect. Look for security as an overlay solution. Databases certainly cannot defend themselves. Applications cannot defend themselves. We need to make sure that we are overlaying our environment with a level of security that again locks down the perimeter, ensures that only privileged users have access to the back end, SQL access in the event of Dynamics GP or many other applications that use SQL as a back end. Making sure that we're limiting system administrator access, making sure that we are mitigating and minimizing, again, that surface area for all of our equipment and applications so that we don't have these entry points. So we've talked about some of the things that are at bay that are circulating around. That goes hand in hand with developing a security risk management process. Again, this is not a one-time. This is something that should be, we suggest and see where it's tied into a company's audit. So a year-on-year, depending on the sensitivity of the data that you're holding, you may want to structure that so these security assessments happen quarterly. So it's very unique to the organization, but we want to have a place where we can identify, we can prioritize and manage these risks to an acceptable level. And that typically starts with a facilitated meeting with some questions. What kind of data do we have? What, if we were to go down, what is the impact on our organization? Being able to identify the sensitive data from data, your standard Word documents that aren't mission critical, but still important to the organizational structure. So developing a formal security risk management process would typically address the following. Again, threat response time, regulatory compliance, whether that's Sarbanes-Oxley or HIPAA, any of the PCIEs, any of the standard, organizational compliances that we may have to work through. So we want to make sure that we're addressing that. Infrastructure management costs. This could be from a hardware standpoint all the way down to a people standpoint. Do we have enough heads? Do we have enough bodies to maximize our protection and, when something does happen, to quickly mitigate that and get us back up and running? And then risk prioritization and management. Again, being able to isolate and identify those risk points, prioritize them so we know, how the organization stands, and then come up with a plan to mitigate those in the event that, we do run into an issue. When it comes to the approach to risk management, we've seen one of the two options. Either it's reactive or proactive. Reactive being that the process starts or occurs when a security event has happened. You certainly don't want to be on that side of the coin. We want to make sure that we have the structure in place to minimize that so that we don't run into these security events. The proactive approach, of course, is being able to put in hardware, software, people, processes, services that will prevent or reduce the risk of these vulnerabilities coming into your organization. So whether you're going through a managed service provider or something that you wear your own IT professional hat at your organization, we want to make sure that we stay as proactive as possible and again minimize that activity. So the life cycle of the security risk management process, number one, again, we have to sit down with all of the power players, all of the department heads, all of the partners, all of the people that are in the know. We need to assess the risk. What applications are going to be more sensitive? What data set is going to be the most sensitive? All the way down the list, so you have a good idea of what you're trying to protect in the first place. Then we have to conduct some decision support, determine who are going to be the players that are going to be protecting this data. How are we going to be protecting it? Are we going to do this through hardware? Are we going to do this through software? Maybe it's even bringing in an extra set of eyes or a third party to help you address that, to make sure that, again, we're minimizing the impact in surface area. Once you've assessed the risk, you've brought in some people and some technology to minimize that. Now we have to implement those controls. And again, implementing is typically not out of the box. We want to make sure that we're tailoring that to our organizational structure, the data that we're protecting, and our end users as well, their habits and behavior. And then lastly, we want to measure that program effectiveness, and that again is something that we do on a routine basis. So after we've gone through this assessment, we've brought in people or we brought in the technology to protect, we've implemented those. Now let's run some tests against that equipment, those people, to determine where are we at. At our firm, we conduct spear phishing campaigns fairly regularly to ensure that users don't forget. One of the sayings that I bring to clients is, when you become complacent, you become comfortable, and vice versa. And that is not a situation that you want your IT professionals nor your end users to be in, because when you become comfortable, when you become lax, that's when you become more prone to, a wrong click or a web page that shouldn't be browsed. I've gone to a couple of industries where they may have even been running a Barracuda, and they've said, well, we're running a Barracuda, so that's capturing everything, all the bad stuff, so I'm comfortable that, the email that winds up in my inbox is free and clean. And that is further from the truth. The Barracuda, like your antivirus solution, like your anti-malware solution, is only as good as the fingerprint or the definition that it holds. But those definitions can quickly become outdated as, again, these new variants come out very frequently. So you want to make sure that your users don't become comfortable, that your IT professionals aren't in the mindset of set it and forget it and never go back and measure the effectiveness of that device. So now you've gone through that life cycle. Now we need to communicate that risk both to the IT professionals, the CXOs, the executive directors, whoever we report to, with a very streamlined statement. What data are we trying to protect? What are our assets? What are our fears? What are the threats of something happening to that data? How vulnerable are we? Is our organization to this threat? And then lastly, how do we mitigate that when something does happen? So we certainly need to look at both the probability of that happening and the impact of when it does happen. All of those things together, we piece together a well-formed risk statement that we store with all of the rest of our policies and procedures, and we go back and we measure that on a routine basis, just as we would with our disaster recovery plan, just as we would with our antivirus solutions and anti-malware solutions. Again, this is certainly not a set and forget it. We want to keep that at the forefront so everybody knows where the organization stands. We also want to determine what the organization's risk management maturity level is. We can do this a number of ways. That we have a matrix that we follow here internally, but you certainly can look out on the web. There are plenty of publications that will help you determine what your risk maturity level is. There is the NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, has a self-assessment guide. There is the IT Governance Institute that will give you some of those control objectives, and again, a self-assessment questionnaire that will help you determine where your risk level is at. And then the ISO Code of Practice for Information Security Management. ISO is another very large corporation that is dedicated to security management. So any of those I think would give you a great starting point to determine what, without implementing any of these controls, where do we stand, and then go back once you've gone through the life cycle and determined what your risk points are. You've implemented, people, processes, services, go back and do a remeasure and find out where you stand. It's a good practice to keep that up and revisit that on a routine basis. Defining your roles and responsibilities is certainly important when it comes down to both leading and culminating this group of power players that's going to help determine what the risks, assess those risks, and then come up with a solution to mitigate those would be. So your executive sponsor is certainly going to be the lead. The information security group is the that typically will identify and prioritize those risks. They will determine what is running on the infrastructure, work with those power players to define security requirements, and then finally measure the solutions that are applicable for that governance. And then the IT group, which may be one and the same, they would then implement that solution, design, build it, and then implement it, and then lastly continue to monitor and maintain that throughout the life cycle. When you're identifying and classifying your assets, an asset is anything of value to your organization and should be classified into one of the three buckets, whether it's a low business impact, it's an annoyance if we have to recreate these couple of Word documents, a few spreadsheets, we can recover it from email. Moderate business impact, yeah, it kind of sucks a little bit that we have to recreate this, or even from a restore standpoint, all the way up to a high business impact. Our business cannot run if this software, this service, this hardware were to go down. So we want to rank our assets into those three buckets to determine that prioritization, so we know where to invest our IT budget dollars first, and then create a couple of plans to encompass the rest of the lower, moderate, and low impact. When we talk about estimating asset exposure, what is the extent of potential damage to an asset? In the terms of an e-commerce site, having credit card information exposed is a huge liability. When I go out to clients, there's a few things that I look for, and more often than not, I'm finding that the Windows firewall has been disabled. Not terribly uncommon for me to see that, but a huge risk point. So when it comes down to exposure, you are not minimizing that at all. If there were to be a breach, whether it be of data, credit card, social security number, tax information, or otherwise, one of the things that is going to happen during that investigation is, did you as an organization do what you could to help minimize that exposure? So doing something as simple as a routine audit against those services on your servers, on your workstations, certainly goes a long way. But we want to use some informal guidelines to estimate that exposure. Low exposure, that bucket is again minor or no loss. We can recover it elsewhere. Medium exposure is limited to moderate loss, and then your high exposure is severe or complete loss of the asset. we certainly don't want to have a big bucket of high exposure, but in some cases our line of business applications are dependent on, again, a SQL database or an Oracle SAP database. We want to make sure that we're minimizing that surface area to turn that high exposure into, at worst a medium, at best a low. So again, running those routine audits and examinations on your own network would help you determine where those risk points are. And then the probability of those threats occurring. A low threat, not probable. We just put in a new firewall. We have IT professionals that are monitoring our services and our software. We don't expect any kind of an impact within the next 3 years. Medium threat, our workstations are, reaching the end of the life cycle. Our firewall is, 5 to 7 years old. Due to the advances in technology, we are at that medium threat. Our proneness level is probable. And then our high threat obviously is, we're running old equipment, we're running old servers, we don't have the knowledge base on hand to monitor, maintain, administer these controls. We expect, these high threats to be likely within a year. Again, we want to make sure that high threat bucket is as empty as possible, and by following some of those best practices, we can certainly minimize that. And then when it comes to defense, again, there is not one piece that is your come-all, end-all. The data layer is certainly going to be the most important because that's where your assets live. That is where your assets are. The application layer that connects to that data, we also want to make sure that we're defending, we're keeping updated, we're running, again, best practices with that third-party application as based on their recommended solution. The host, the server, the virtual machine that application is running on, we want to make sure that it is locked down, that it is hardened, that you're running those Windows updates, that you have antivirus solutions in play. You're locking down permissions and shares so that end users can't haphazardly get in there, but also so ransomware can't leverage a privileged account to make some changes and destroy some data. Above and beyond the host, there's the network. When we talk about the distributed denial of service, making sure we have protections in there so that our workstations can't become botnets. Again, these small collection of workstations that can grow very large and disrupt our network. And then lastly, the physical structure, whether that be HVAC or, again, security cameras, any other type of connected device. We've seen a couple of issues where a lot of us have temperature gauges or sensors that are in our server rooms or MDF rooms, where they're constantly checking humidity and air pressure and temperature. These things can also be compromised because they're connected to our wireless networks and have an entry point back into our infrastructure. So when we talk about defending the cyber attacks of the world today, the big takeaway is that it's not any one bucket, it's not any one person, it's not any one software. It's really an aggregate of everything that's running on your networks, from the people all the way up to your router, firewall, edge equipment. So again, the takeaways are follow best whenever possible. It's easy to turn off the firewall for testing. We certainly see that, with in the field with consultants that will, turn it off to see if something works and then not circle back to turn that back on. Of course, not our consultants, but we've seen the consultant, structure do that. Third-party vendors coming in to perform a very isolated task, not seeing the forest through the trees, and then creating a risk point. When we talk about, where risk can come from, of course, it's inside out. It is certainly outside in, and a lot of us have vendors, whether it be a phone vendor or a managed service vendor or a hardware as a service or a software as a service vendor that we give elevated access to. That would be another risk area. If their machine, even though they might be disconnected from your corporate enterprise, if they were to get infected, all it takes is a connection back to your data center or your server, and that will manifest itself over. So, not only controlling our end users and our accounts internally, but also who and why we give access, elevated access to outside of our network should also be audited and reviewed. That leads me to, that takes me to the end of the presentation today. I don't know if, second here, I don't see any questions. If you enjoyed the webinar, please shoot me off an email if there's something additional that you'd like to see. Please let me know that as well. When we do these security discussions, it's very easy to, especially when we're talking about ransomware, and it has a track record of bringing very large organizations down, police departments, hospitals. Again, knowing that these attacks are growing in scale, they're becoming more targeted, it's very easy to have this discussion sound apocalyptic. And that's certainly not my intent, but more so to stress that these bad guys are out there. They are trying. Just as professionals, we take CPE. We we research. We scour the web. We hone our abilities, our skill set. They are doing the same thing, but on the opposite side of the coin. So you have to keep that in mind. We have to think about these types of attacks as worst case scenario, and not become comfortable or complacent that our organization is at where it should be, top notch. Everything is in a low bucket. We certainly want to stress that you audit that, you assess that on a routine basis, and of course back up. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation this morning. Thank you for attending, and I hope you have a great rest of the week.